The morning broke, not with a gentle dawn, but with a violent slash of sunlight, a blade cutting through the gap in the curtains to strike me directly across the eyes. My head responded with a dull, throbbing protest, a low hum of complaint for the excesses of the night before. A cloying sweetness coated my tongue, the ghost of too much red wine and conversations that had stretched long past midnight. I lay motionless amidst the tangled landscape of my sheets, feeling the room tilt and sway as it slowly settled back into its familiar geography. On the nightstand, two glasses stood as silent witnesses, their bases stained with the dark dregs of wine, a half-empty bottle slumped between them like a weary chaperone. The scene was a quiet testament to a reunion, a night dedicated to closing the distance of years. My gaze drifted to the armchair in the corner, where a spill of fabric lay in a heap of vibrant color. It was a silk blouse, the shade of a summer sunset, thrown there with a carelessness that did not belong to me. It was hers. The sight of it brought a fragmented memory to the surface, the sound of the front door opening, the rush of cool evening air, and then her, standing in the entryway, smiling a smile that instantly filled the quiet spaces of my apartment. She was a whirlwind of youth and energy, her presence a stark, brilliant contrast to the muted tones of my solitary life. The years of separation seemed to fall away in that first moment, dissolved by the easy familiarity of a shared past, however complicated it may have been. The memories of the evening that followed were like scattered, overexposed photographs. I could recall the sharp, satisfying clink of our glasses toasting to nothing in particular, the low thrum of music weaving through our words. We had talked for hours, the wine unspooling our histories, smoothing over the awkward edges of time and distance. Her laughter, a sound I hadn't realized I'd missed, echoed in the room, bright and uninhibited. I remembered the way she leaned in as she spoke, her eyes intense, making me feel as though I were the only person in the world. We were erasing time, drinking our way back to a place where the lines between us were softer, less defined. There was one memory that surfaced with more clarity than the others, a single, sharp vignette. We were sitting on the sofa, the bottle nearly empty between us, and her head had come to rest on my shoulder. I remembered the surprising weight of it, a comforting, grounding pressure. Her hair, a cascade of dark chestnut, smelled of jasmine and something clean, like fresh rain. I had frozen for a second, caught off guard by the casual intimacy of the gesture. Her warmth seeped through the fabric of my shirt, a slow, spreading heat that felt both deeply soothing and strangely unsettling, stirring something dormant within me that I could not put a name to. After that, the memories dissolved into a thick, viscous fog, a blackout as dark and complete as the bottom of the wine bottle. I had no recollection of how we ended up in my bed, no memory of saying goodnight. Yet, as I lay there, trying to force my sluggish brain to fill in the gaps, I was aware of a feeling that contradicted the harsh reality of my hangover. It was a strange and pleasant languor, a deep, humming contentment that seemed to emanate not from my aching head, but from the very core of my body. It was an unfamiliar sensation of being utterly satiated, a physical peace that made no logical sense. The air in the bedroom was warm and thick, heavy with the lingering scent of sleep and spilled wine. But underneath those familiar smells, there was something else, a subtle, musky undertone that was both foreign and intimate. It was the scent of heated skin, of shared breath, an almost electric charge still hanging in the atmosphere. The room itself felt altered, as if the space had been transformed by events my mind refused to recall. The silence was not empty, it was dense, filled with the resonance of a night that had clearly held more than just conversation. I closed my eyes again, abandoning the effort of remembering. It was easier to float in this strange in-between state, this hazy borderland between consciousness and sleep. Part of me knew I should force myself up, confront the day and the awkward morning after that was sure to follow, but another, more powerful part of me wanted to sink back into the darkness, to cling to the pleasant, baseless exhaustion that held my limbs captive. The desire to simply feel rather than to think and understand was overwhelming. My body felt heavy and serene, anchored to the bed by a profound weariness. As I surrendered, letting my consciousness drift, the reality of the sunlit room began to recede. The pounding in my head softened, replaced by a slow, rhythmic pulse that seemed to beat in time with my own heart. The physical world dissolved into pure sensation, a warmth that started in my stomach and spread outward through my limbs. The last vestiges of coherent thought slipped away, and I felt myself falling, not into the empty void of sleep, but into something more vivid, a place where feelings took shape and the body's secret knowledge was allowed to speak. I was on the verge of a dream, or perhaps on the verge of a memory trying to disguise itself as one. The dream was a place of warmth and water, a dark, velvet ocean where I floated weightlessly. There were no images, no sounds, only the pure, tactile sensation of waves caressing my skin. Gentle currents swirled around my legs, lapping against my thighs with a soft, rhythmic persistence. It was a dream of profound comfort, a return to some primal, edgeless state of being. The water was impossibly warm, the temperature of blood, and with every slow pulse, it seemed to draw the tension from my muscles, leaving me pliant and receptive in the gentle tide. I drifted in this blissful abyss, a disembodied consciousness anchored only by the steady, lulling motion. Then, the dream shifted, becoming more specific, more intimate. The formless waves coalesced into a distinct touch, the slow, deliberate stroke of a hand gliding along my inner thigh. It was a touch that held no urgency, only a quiet, confident curiosity. My sleeping mind accepted it without question, weaving it into the fabric of the fantasy. I felt the feather-light trace of fingertips, followed by the warm, firm pressure of a palm. A hot breath ghosted across my skin, and then a wet, open-mouthed kiss was placed just above my knee, sending a tremor of shocking pleasure through me. The dream was no longer passive. It had an agent, a nameless, faceless entity dedicated solely to my arousal. The pleasure began to build, a slow, coiling heat deep within my belly. The phantom touch moved higher, more purposefully now, exploring the sensitive flesh of my upper thighs with an almost reverent patience. Then came the impossibly real sensation of a tongue, wet and skillful, tracing lazy circles, teasing the very edge of my core. My body, even in sleep, responded instinctively, a soft sigh escaping my lips, my hips tilting ever so slightly in a silent invitation. It was a perfect, exquisite torture, a slow ascent toward a peak I could feel gathering like a storm cloud on the horizon. The dream was becoming overwhelmingly vivid, its sensations bleeding into the physical realm with an intensity that began to stir me from my slumber. It was the intensity that finally broke the spell. The pleasure was too sharp, too focused, too undeniably real to be a mere figment of my subconscious. My eyes fluttered open, and for a disoriented moment, I was met with the familiar sight of my bedroom ceiling, bathed in the soft, hazy light of morning. The dream was over, yet the sensation was not. The rhythmic lapping motion between my legs continued, unabated, a tangible reality that defied the logic of my waking mind. A profound confusion washed over me as I struggled to reconcile the sight of my room with the impossible, dreamlike act that was still taking place. My body was still adrift in that warm ocean, even as my eyes told me I was firmly on land. I lowered my gaze, my head feeling heavy and slow. What I saw made no immediate sense, a surreal tableau that my hungover brain struggled to process. A cascade of rich chestnut hair was spread across my thighs, the strands catching the morning light like threads of silk. It was a beautiful, startling sight, but one that held no context. There was a person there, their head buried between my legs, their body hidden from view by the angle and the rumpled sheets. A stranger in my bed was the first logical, panicked thought, but it was quickly dismissed. There was no fear, only a deep, pervasive sense of bewilderment and the undeniable, rising tide of physical ecstasy. My mind, sluggish and clouded, began to search for an explanation. The hair was familiar. I had seen it just last night, had watched it fall across her shoulders as she laughed. The faint, sweet scent of jasmine, no longer a phantom from a dream, rose to meet me, solidifying the impossible connection. It was a scent I now associated with her arrival, with the wine, with the warmth of her head on my shoulder. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place, forming a picture so shocking, so utterly taboo, that my brain actively resisted it. It was a truth too monstrous to be accepted, yet my body felt no such hesitation. The full, devastating weight of the realization could crash down upon me. The sensations overwhelmed all cognitive thought. The rhythmic pressure intensified, the skillful exploration becoming more demanding, more insistent. A low groan vibrated from the person between my legs, a sound of pure, focused intent that resonated deep inside me. My body took over, a vessel of pure sensation. There was no room for analysis, no space for shame or confusion. There was only this exquisite, undeniable pleasure that was building toward an unstoppable crescendo. I stopped fighting the truth. I stopped fighting anything at all. I arched my back, my fingers gripping the sheets as my body gave itself over completely. My hips rose to meet each deliberate stroke, a silent, primal encouragement. My breath came in ragged gasps, the sounds alien and unrestrained in the quiet of the room. It was a purely physical conversation, a dialogue of touch and response that bypassed all a lifetime of rules and boundaries. My body was a traitor, eagerly embracing this forbidden act, craving it with a desperation that silenced the screaming protests of my mind. I was no longer a participant. I was the act itself, a being of pure, unadulterated sensation. The climax arrived not as a gentle wave, but as a violent, shattering torrent. It was a complete obliteration of self, a moment where the world contracted to a single, blinding point of white-hot pleasure. My body convulsed, a deep, shuddering release that seemed to go on forever, echoing through every nerve ending. A cry was torn from my throat, a sound of both agony and ecstasy. I was dimly aware of the body between my legs tensing, of a soft, satisfied sigh against my skin as the aftershock slowly subsided. I was left trembling and breathless, my body slick with sweat, my mind a complete and utter blank. I lay there in the aftermath, floating in a sea of blissful exhaustion. The world slowly seeped back in. The light from the window, the scent of jasmine, the weight of another person still resting against me. The shocking identity of my lover was no longer a question to be resisted, but a fact that was settling into the quiet spaces of my mind. It was her. It was my sister. And as my body hummed with the remnants of an impossible pleasure, the most terrifying realization of all was that I felt no regret. There was only a profound, unsettling peace and the quiet, dawning awareness that a line had been crossed from which there would be no return. A humming stillness settled over me in the wake of the storm, a profound quiet that was more than just the absence of sound. My body felt boneless and heavy, anchored to the mattress by a languid, deep-seated peace. The frantic energy of moments before had dissolved, leaving behind a placid lake of sensation. I was acutely aware of the continued presence between my legs, the soft weight of her head resting on my inner thigh, the gentle warmth of her breath against my still sensitive skin. The air in the room was thick with our commingled scents, an intimate perfume of jasmine, sweat, and the unique metallic tang of arousal. It was the scent of a boundary irrevocably crossed. My mind, which had been a blank slate of pure sensation, slowly began to repopulate with thoughts. The shocking truth was no longer a frantic, panicked whisper, but a solid, unavoidable fact sitting in the center of my consciousness. This was not a stranger, not a dream, but my sister. The thought did not bring the revulsion or horror I knew it should. Instead, it was met with a strange, detached curiosity, as if I were an observer to my own life. The sheer, undeniable pleasure she had just given me was a powerful anesthetic, numbing the nerve endings of my conscience and leaving only a deep, resonant gratitude in its place. A primal, instinctual impulse moved through me, an urge to connect that bypassed all rational thought. I lifted my hand, the movement feeling slow and deliberate, as if moving through water. My fingers found her hair, sinking into the thick, silken mass. It was exactly as I remembered from the night before, soft and cool to the touch. I didn't pull or push, but simply rested my hand there, a silent acknowledgement, an acceptance. The gesture felt both impossibly intimate and completely natural. I was no longer a passive recipient of this act. With this simple touch, I had become a participant. She responded instantly. A soft, approving sound, almost a purr, vibrated against my skin. She shifted her weight slightly, pressing her cheek more firmly against my thigh, a gesture of almost feline contentment. Then her tongue flicked out, a single, slow, deliberate lick that sent a fresh shiver of electricity through my sated body. It was different from before, no longer the exploratory touch of a lover in the dark, but a knowing, possessive claim. My fingers tightened in her hair, a silent, involuntary response to the new current that was beginning to build between us. This was no longer an accident of a drunken night. It was becoming a conscious choice. Slowly, she lifted her head, and the intensity of her gaze struck me with the force of a physical blow. Her dark eyes, pupils wide and fathomless, were locked on mine. There was no shame in them, no uncertainty or regret. There was only a raw, unvarnished desire mixed with a profound, unnerving knowingness, as if she could see directly into the most secret parts of my soul. Her lips were slick and slightly swollen, a testament to her recent work. And then I saw it, just below the delicate line of her jaw, partially hidden by a stray lock of hair. A tiny, perfect mole in the shape of a crescent moon. The mark I had traced with my finger 1,000 times when she was a child. The sight of that mole was the final, irrefutable proof, a physical signature connecting this impossible woman to the little girl I had known. The last barrier in my mind crumbled to dust. In that moment, she was not my sister, not my family, but a being of pure, unadulterated want, a mirror reflecting back my own buried desires. I acted without thinking, driven by an impulse more powerful than reason. I tightened my grip on her hair and gently pulled her upward, guiding her face toward mine. The movement was a surrender and a demand, all at once. Our lips met, and the world outside the bed ceased to exist. The kiss was not gentle. It was a desperate, hungry collision. I tasted myself on her mouth, a salty, musky flavor that was both shocking and deeply erotic. Her tongue met mine, not with tentative exploration, but with an immediate, confident familiarity, as if it had known its way for years. This was not the kiss of a newfound lover. It was the kiss of a reunion, of a truth finally physically acknowledged. It sealed the forbidden nature of what we were doing, transforming it from a transgression into a covenant. With a fluid, graceful motion, she moved up my body, her skin sliding against mine. The friction was electric, raising goosebumps in its wake. She settled over me, her weight a comforting pressure, her legs tangling with mine. I felt the soft fullness of her breasts press against my own, the steady, rhythmic beat of her heart against my ribs. Looking up into her eyes, so close now, I saw my own reflection, my face a mask of shock and undeniable bliss. Her hands began to roam, no longer confined to one area, but charting the territory of my entire body with a slow, deliberate purpose. Her touch was a revelation. Her fingers traced my collarbones, circled my navel, and swept down my sides, awakening skin that had felt dormant for years. It was as if she knew every sensitive place, every curve and hollow of my body better than I did myself. She moved with an eerie, instinctual grace, her hands and mouth working in a slow, intoxicating rhythm that began to build a new fire within me, different from the first. This was not the frantic, desperate pleasure of before. This was a deeper, slower burn, an intimacy so profound it felt like a violation of the soul. As she lowered her head to my breast, her hair curtaining her face, I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her closer still. My body began to move with hers, our hips finding a slow, grinding rhythm that was both agonizingly tender and intensely carnal. The pleasure built again, this time not as a shocking wave, but as a deep, swelling tide pulling us both under. We were no longer two separate people, but a single entity, moving toward a shared conclusion. The end, when it came, was not a shattering, but a quiet, simultaneous dissolving, a moment of perfect, silent unity, where the world outside our embrace simply ceased to be. The world returned to me slowly, in pieces. First came the awareness of my own slowing heartbeat, a heavy, steady drum against my ribs. Then the feeling of her heart beating in time with mine, a resonant echo where her body was pressed against my own. We lay tangled in the sheets, limbs intertwined, a single breathing entity in the quiet aftermath. The violent, shattering release had left a profound stillness in its wake, a heavy, velvet silence that seemed to absorb all sound, all thought, leaving only the pure, physical fact of our shared space. The energy that had crackled between us was gone, replaced by a deep, humming warmth that radiated from our point of contact. The morning light filtering through the curtains had softened, losing its sharp, accusatory edge. It now bathed the room in a gentle, golden glow, illuminating the motes of dust dancing in the air like tiny, silent constellations. The scent of our encounter hung heavy in the atmosphere, a complex and primal perfume of sex and sweat and her jasmine shampoo. It was the scent of a new reality, an aroma that had permanently altered the geography of this room, a space that would never again feel entirely my own. I was suspended in this moment, a perfect, timeless bubble of sensation where the past was a dream and the future did not exist. Her weight on top of me was a comfort, a grounding presence that kept me from floating away. I could feel the delicate architecture of her shoulder blade beneath my palm, the soft, damp strands of her hair splayed across my neck and chest. Her breathing was a slow, even rhythm against my skin, a quiet exhalation of a shared, profound exhaustion. She was completely at rest, her body pliant and relaxed against mine, in a display of absolute trust that was both beautiful and terrifying. In this quiet moment, the shocking act we had committed felt less like a transgression and more like an inevitability, a final, logical step in a dance we didn't know we were performing. I searched within myself for the expected sting of guilt, the sharp, cold blade of shame that I knew should be carving me apart, but I found nothing. In its place was a strange and unsettling serenity, a calm, placid surface where a storm of self-loathing should have been raging. It was as if the intensity of the physical act had cauterized my conscience, burning away the capacity for regret. The moral compass I had lived by my entire life was silent, its needles spinning uselessly, unable to find Norse in this new, uncharted territory. This absence of guilt was more disorienting than the guilt itself would have been. A soft sigh escaped her lips, a sound so quiet it was more a feeling than a noise, a gentle puff of air against my collarbone. She stirred, a subtle shift of her muscles that rippled through my own body. The perfect stillness was broken, the bubble pricked. It was the first sign of a return to our separate selves, a quiet announcement that this moment of complete fusion was coming to an end. I felt a pang of something I could not name, not sadness, not fear, but a deep primal reluctance to let the moment pass, to return to a world where we were two distinct people with a history that now felt like a lie. She lifted her head, her hair falling away to reveal her face. Her eyes, when they met mine, were dark and clear, holding an expression of profound, placid sorrow. The fiery desire of before was gone, replaced by a deep, ancient understanding that seemed to reach across the space between us and touch something deep within me. She was seeing me, truly seeing me in this state of complete vulnerability, and I felt stripped bare, not just of my clothes, but of every defense I had ever built. In her gaze, I saw no judgment, only a shared, silent acknowledgement of the abyss we had just crossed together. Her fingers, long and delicate, came up to trace the line of my jaw. The touch was feather-light, almost reverent, a stark contrast to the hungry, demanding touch of moments before. It was a gesture of impossible tenderness, an act of gentle affection that felt more taboo, more deeply transgressive than anything that had come before it. This quiet, caring touch was the most confusing part of the entire encounter, suggesting an emotional depth to this act that I was not prepared to confront. It implied a connection that went far beyond the physical, a bond forged in a fire I didn't understand. The silence between us was no longer a shared comfort, but a heavy, pressurized blanket. It was filled with all the words we could not say, all the questions I was too afraid to ask. Every second that passed without speech made the chasm of what we had done wider and deeper. The physical intimacy had been absolute, but it had created an emotional distance that felt vast and unbridgeable. We were closer than any two people should be, yet we were now separated by a truth so monumental it defied language. Slowly, deliberately, she began to detangle her limbs from mine. The movement was fluid and unhurried, devoid of any awkwardness or haste. I felt the loss of her warmth as a sudden chill, the cool air of the room touching my skin where she had been just a moment before. She pushed herself up, her back a pale, graceful curve in the morning light, and sat on the edge of the bed, facing away from me. The separation was complete, a physical severing that felt like a final, silent statement. I lay there, watching the woman who was my sister, her silhouette framed by the window. The intimate landscape of our intertwined bodies had been replaced by this new geography of distance and silence. She was no longer a faceless extension of my own pleasure, but a separate, distinct person once more, a mystery I now had to confront. Looking at her, at the quiet strength in the set of her shoulders, I realized that I did not know her at all. And in the quiet, sunlit room, a terrifying thought began to form. Perhaps I had never known myself either. She sat on the edge of the bed, her back to me, a pale and graceful silhouette against the morning light. The perfect, shared stillness of moments before was gone, replaced by a new, charged quiet. I watched the delicate line of her spine, the gentle curve of her shoulders, and felt as if I were looking at a stranger, a beautiful and enigmatic sculpture that had just been carved into existence. The tangled sheets around me felt like the remnants of a shipwreck, and I was a survivor marooned on an island of confusion, watching the ship that had wrecked me calmly prepare to set sail. The space between us, though only a few feet, felt like an impassable chasm. With a motion that was entirely fluid and unhurried, she rose to her feet. There was no awkward fumbling for balance, no self-conscious attempt to cover herself. She stood in the soft light of the room, her nakedness not a state of vulnerability, but one of quiet, unnerving authority. She seemed perfectly at home in her own skin, completely untroubled by the cataclysmic event that had just occurred. Her composure was a stark and terrifying contrast to the chaotic symphony of shock and sensation still playing out within my own body. She was the calm at the center of a storm she had created. She moved across the room to the armchair where her clothes lay in a vibrant heap. I watched as she picked up the sunset-colored silk blouse, the fabric whispering as it unfolded in her hands. Each movement was deliberate, a slow and methodical ritual of reassembly. She pulled the blouse over her head, then stepped into her jeans, the rasp of the zipper unnaturally loud in the silent room. Every button fastened, every piece of fabric put back in its place, felt like a lock being turned, sealing the moment away, compartmentalizing an act that had felt boundless and infinite. She was methodically erasing the woman from the bed and rebuilding the sister from the night before. I remained a fixture in the landscape of our transgression, half covered by a sheet that felt as heavy as lead. The imprint of her body was still warm on the mattress beside me, a ghostly presence that was more tangible than her actual form now standing across the room. My skin tingled with the memory of her touch, and the air I breathed was still thick with her scent. The room itself felt like a crime scene, and I was both victim and accomplice, unable to move, pinned down by the sheer weight of what we had done. The silence from her side of the room was not an absence of sound, but an active, deafening statement. She gathered her few belongings from the nightstand, her phone, her wallet, a single silver earring she had apparently removed at some point. There was no flight in her actions, only a methodical conclusion, as if she were simply tidying up after a project was completed. She did not once look in my direction, yet I felt her awareness of me as a constant, palpable pressure. It was a performance of normalcy so perfect, so complete, that it felt like a form of madness. She was acting as if this were just any other morning, and that calculated denial was more shocking than the act itself. At the threshold of the bedroom, she finally paused. Her hand rested on the doorknob, but she did not turn it. For a long, breathless moment, she stood completely still, her back still to me. Then she slowly turned her head, looking at me over her shoulder. Our eyes met across the room, and the placid mask she wore cracked for just an instant. In the depths of her gaze, I saw not desire or satisfaction, but a deep, bottomless sorrow, an ancient pain that seemed to have no source and no end. It was a look that offered no explanation, no apology, only a shared, devastating acknowledgement of a wound that could never be healed. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the look was gone, replaced once more by a cool, unreadable composure. She turned away, and the soft click of the latch as she pulled the door closed echoed in the room like a gunshot. The sound severed the last invisible thread connecting us. She was gone. The immediate aftermath was not a rush of feeling, but a profound, hollow emptiness. The silence she left behind was different from the one we had shared. It was a sterile, suffocating vacuum, the kind of quiet that presses in on your ears and magnifies the frantic, terrified beating of your own heart. I was alone. The statement was simple, but its reality was staggering. I was utterly and completely alone in a room that was now a mausoleum, a monument to a single, impossible morning. The golden light that had seemed so gentle now felt harsh and clinical, exposing every detail of the rumpled sheets and the faint, lingering scent of her skin. The silence was no longer just an absence of her voice. It was the deafening presence of our shared secret, a testament to a truth so vast and monstrous that it had consumed all the air in the room, leaving me unable to breathe. Time became a thick, syrupy substance, and I was trapped within it. I finally forced myself from the bed, my limbs feeling like they belonged to someone else, heavy and uncoordinated. The floor was cold against my bare feet, the sensation a sharp, unwelcome anchor to a reality I no longer recognized. I moved through the room with the slow, aimless drift of a ghost, my own reflection in the darkened window, a pale, spectral stranger. The silence she had left behind was an active presence, a weight that pressed down on my shoulders and filled my lungs, making each breath a conscious effort. I needed to do something, anything, to break the spell of the suffocating quiet. My eyes landed on the armchair, empty now except for the indentation her body had left in the cushion. But beside it, partially tucked underneath, was her travel bag. It was small and unassuming, a simple canvas duffel she had apparently forgotten in her quiet, deliberate departure. The sight of it was a jolt, a tangible piece of her left behind in the wreckage. It was an anomaly in her otherwise clean and calculated exit, and it called to me with the silent promise of an explanation, a clue, a single piece of logic in a world that had just been stripped of all sense. I knelt before the bag, my hands trembling as I reached for the zipper. I wasn't driven by a desire to pry, but by a desperate, primal need to understand. I needed to find something, anything, that would help me categorize the woman who had just left my bed, to place her back into the neat, familiar box labeled sister. The zipper parted with a rough, grating sound, a violent tear in the room's oppressive silence. The bag's contents were a simple, chaotic jumble of clothes and toiletries, the ordinary belongings of any traveler, and for a moment I felt a wave of foolish relief. But beneath a folded sweater, my fingers brushed against the hard, stiff corner of a folder. It was old and worn, the cardboard soft at the edges, held together by a fraying elastic band. It felt out of place amongst the soft fabrics, an object with history and weight. With a sense of impending dread, I pulled it out. My heart began to pound a heavy, frantic rhythm against my ribs as I slipped the elastic band free and opened the cover. The contents were not random papers. They were a meticulously curated archive of a life. The first thing I saw was a photograph, printed on glossy paper and clearly recent. It was a picture of me asleep in this very bed, my face relaxed and vulnerable, the morning light just beginning to touch my pillow. The angle was intimate, taken from the spot where she must have sat watching me before she woke me with her touch. A cold, spider-like fear crawled up my spine. This was not a spontaneous act of passion. This was calculated. Beneath the photo was a yellowed hospital bracelet, brittle with age. My name was typed on it, alongside a date from 30 years ago. My breath hitched in my throat. I didn't understand the bracelet's significance, but its presence felt ominous, a relic from a past I had long since buried. My trembling fingers pushed it aside, revealing the last document in the folder. It was a birth certificate. I scanned the typed lines, my vision blurring, the words swimming before my eyes, until they snapped into a horrifying, impossible focus. Mother's name, mine. Father's name, my stepfather's, her father. And the child's date of birth, the date I knew as well as my own, her birthday. The world tilted on its axis, the floor seeming to fall away beneath me. The air was stolen from my lungs in a single, silent gasp. She was not my stepsister. She was my daughter. The daughter I had been told died moments after birth. The secret child of a terrified teenager and a man who was not my husband. The secret my mother and stepfather had sworn to take to their graves. The entire architecture of my life, the very foundation of my identity, crumbled into dust in that single, horrifying moment of revelation. The front door of the apartment clicked open. The sound was soft, almost gentle, but it landed like a physical blow. I looked up from the damning papers in my hand, my body frozen, my mind a screaming void. She stood in the doorway, not looking flustered or forgetful, but perfectly calm. She held a key in her hand. She had never forgotten her bag at all. Her gaze was not on my face, but on the birth certificate I clutched in my white-knuckled grip. And on her face was not an apology or fear or love. It was a look of profound, devastating victory, the terrifying, triumphant expression of a ghost who had finally, after a lifetime of waiting, come home to haunt.